All right, welcome to day 2 of the AWD1115 Database-Driven Web Development 2 class. I'm taking for granted, Grant, that you can see my screen and that you can see that I've got chapter 1 up on the screen. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so with that said, then let's get started. I will tell you, yesterday there was a glitch when I tried recording. I have no idea what went wrong, but this has happened 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years. And so I re-recorded. The good news is, for those who watched the re-recording, you didn't see most of my screw-ups that I did live for the two of you. All right. And it went down from about 3 hours to about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So, all right. Now, much of the material in chapter 1, or let's just say some of the material in chapter 1, we'll go over fairly quickly. When we get to the actual MVC stuff in here, we'll slow it down and take some more time. But I believe I mentioned this the other day, and that is this introduction to web apps until we get to about page 10. This is stuff we've had before. Once we get into the introduction to the ASP or to the MVC pattern, like I said, we'll slow it down. All right. So the hope is to go over chapters 1 and 2 today. And I believe in chapter 2 in the textbook, I believe what the authors do in there is they go over the future value app, and we're going to do that. And we'll see where we are time-wise after that. And then maybe tomorrow we'll go back and we'll redo that. But we will redo that as, from scratch. In other words, from an empty template. So with that said, let's just get started. And because all of you who are watching this, whether it's live or on tape, I don't want to sit there and read to you. All right. I think that some of the students this morning, especially the ones who are in the AWD 1000 class and didn't have me last semester for C#, were surprised that, we did the lecture this morning in 3 hours, and it could have been a lot longer, but I don't want to sit there and read all the stuff that's in the book. To me, that's just a waste of my time, and it's a waste of your time. By now, I believe you all know what the components of a web app are. And I believe I mentioned this to you back in the AWD 1000 timeframe. But years ago, this would have said computer, computer, computer. All right. And this would have been a desktop probably, or possibly a laptop. But today, as you've already heard from me or Evan or both of us, tablets and smartphones have basically taken over, and more people are accessing the internet using those two mechanisms than are using laptops and desktops. All right. So here's your typical web app. There is a typical URL. I do like the way that in here they've changed this to HTTPS. You'll probably notice that most sites you go out to start with HTTPS rather than HTTP. Even Rankins does. Now, especially sites, and I've said this before, I don't think this is any real surprise to anyone, but like this morning, my wife is going out, she's going to meet her sisters, and they do this once a year or once every other year. So she was renting a motel or a motel room for a couple nights. And I went back and looked at the URL, and I thought it would be, and it was, but I wanted to make sure that it was an HTTPS, which it was. All right. And again, that HTTPS, the S is for secure, and supposedly it provides TLS. It provides a more secure mechanism. It's harder for people to break into and do damage. All right. A web app then consists of client servers and a network. That shouldn't be a surprise. Again, many of the clients today are smartphones and tablets. And you also should know, as far as that when we get into this and we talk whether it's static or whether it is dynamic, which we'll look at in a minute, in both those cases, you're making an HTTP or a hypertext transfer protocol request. All right. And that request is going out to a server someplace. If it's simplistic, for instance, if I go out to HTTPS Rankin.edu, their main server will just basically give me back Rankin's homepage, formatted as HTML. All right. So I make the HTTP request, I get back an HTTP response. All right. Or HTTPS, but the idea is the same. But typically in that case, there's only one server involved, as you see right here. All right. Now, the other thing, and we'll look at that in a minute, is when you are working with dynamic data. So I'm not going to do this, but if I went out to Amazon, all right, it's going to give me back just a regular page. But as soon as I go out and say, hey, I want to look for books, all right, then it's going to basically be giving me something of a more dynamic nature. So I'm able to go out and start ordering things. All right. And again, I don't believe any of that stuff is new to anybody in this class. So again, when they say the dynamic, there's typically more than one server there. And typically, whether you've got a web browser that goes to a single server with a request and then back with a response, or you've got a web browser that makes a request that goes to another server, that goes to another server and back and back and back with a response to the web browser, that's typically referred to as a round trip when it goes through the entire cycle. All right. And again, probably at least that's nothing new to anyone. All right. So as I said earlier, some of this will be repeat from yesterday, but I'd rather go over something twice than miss it and not go over it at all. We are using in this class the model view controller, typically referred to as the MVC pattern. Again, as it says, it's our application up into specific areas known as the separation of concerns. As it says, it requires a little more work, but it leads to benefits. One of the big benefits, not for this class, but for an actual application for a company is, as it says, you can have different members of a team work on different components. So if you've got somebody who's really got a flair for web design, they might be working on your view part and not understand or anything else, anything about the model or anything about the controller. In much the same way, if you've got someone who's really good with databases, they can do that and not have to worry about the view or about the controller. As it says, in short, it tends to make apps easier to code, test, debug, and maintain. All right. So as it says here, the model is in charge of the data. It gets and updates the data in a data store. What you're going to find is very soon for us, it's going to be a database. With what we worked on yesterday, because we used a fairly simplistic example, all right, we worked with just a C# list. All right. We still had rules. Okay. The business rules, the biggest thing with business rules, all right, is that if you are going to take something and either modify or add something to a database, you need some kind of rules that are set up, and really they're set up in your schema when you think about it, to make sure that if a field is required, you don't leave it blank. If a field is numeric, you don't leave it blank, or you don't put something non-numeric in it, etc. All right. So these are much more simplistic definitions. The view, as it says, is in charge of the user interface. So it's all the stuff that we worked on in the AWD1000 class, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, the jQuery, the Bootstrap, etc. And the controller, as I'd mentioned yesterday, I likened it to a supervisor in that they're in charge of controlling the flow. So as it says, it receives the request from the browser, sends that data, gets that data from the correct model and sends that data back to the appropriate view. All right. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, and you saw it in the 2 minutes of that video that I put out there. And that is the model should have nothing to do with formatting data or displaying it. The view should have nothing to do with the data, period, other than basically displaying it. And the controller should move data between model and view, but should have nothing to do with the business rules. All right. So again, this is the way that they're defining the MVC pattern in here. All right. And I don't want to read this. We just went over this stuff. We went over the components. We went over the benefits. Now, the drawbacks, I'm not even going to agree or disagree, but when they say it requires more work to set up, typically what you find is after you go in and you set up kind of your first, when you go in and you set up your first project, from then on, you're going to have a very common way of doing it. So yeah, it might take a little more time on the outset, but not a whole substantially a lot more. All right. Nothing else new on that page. So now we got our introduction to ASP.NET Core MVC. And it's important to realize what they meant on the previous pages is MVC is MVC. All right. And what I mean by that is you can write model view controller programs for Java. You can write them for C#. You can write them for you can write them for JavaScript. You can write MVC programs for virtually any programming language. But now we're changing and we are going to learn, as it says, some concepts that are more specific to ASP.NET Core MVC. All right. Now, they've got in here these 4 different models for web apps. And let's take a look here because I don't want to spend much time on it. You'll notice the big thing was when we had web forms, and we've used web forms, but not ASP.NET web forms. As it says, it uses the ASP framework. It only ran on Windows. So if you had a Linux box or you were running a Mac, you were out of luck. All right. So starting in 2007, as it says there, all right, it used the MVC pattern, but notice it still used the same proprietary Windows only ASP network. Then starting in 2015, it was built on the open source ASP.NET Core platform. And that's why it's basically, it's an open source platform and it runs on virtually any platform. Okay. Now with the core Razor pages, as it says, it provides the same features, but accesses those features using a model built on top of MVC. We're really using core MVC, but we're bringing Razor into our documents. All right. Some of the components, and again, some of this stuff maybe is new and some of it might not be new. All right. So when you look right there, we're used to using the .NET framework for Windows. And on top of that, we've got ASP.NET. And on top of that, we've got, the other stuff on top of it. All right. And I mean, again, unless you're asked some of this stuff, and I haven't looked at the written tests, it's not that that's unimportant, but it's not like it's really important either. All right. Now, one of the things that they talk about in here is middleware. And for Grant and for James and for Andrew and for Chad, you worked with middleware a lot last semester or last summer with Evan. All right. You worked with middleware when you use Node, etc. But this is ASP.NET Core middleware. And really, to me, it's not as pronounced as what you used before. As they mention here, each middleware component can modify a request before passing it on, and it can modify the response before passing it on. So picture here in figure 1.7 of what's going on. And you'll notice there is other kinds of middleware other than what they mention here. But basically what they're doing is they're taking and they're breaking down whatever it is you want to do in your application, and you're breaking it down into components, and we're referring to those components as our middleware. By now, we've talked about this yesterday. We've talked about this earlier as well. By now, you should all understand what authentication is. You should all understand what authorization is. All right. The routing, I know you did some routing last semester. And again here, the concept will be similar. The syntax, of course, will be different. All right. Then they've got another request, as it says, that's short-circuited by a middleware component. So in other words, we're leaving the routing out of it in this case. Now, in the example that we did yesterday, all right, we had routing, but we just used the default routing, if you remember that. So there was nothing extra we had to add. By and large, most of the programs that we created here, we will have to go into that program CS file and add other routes for our program. All right. So here's what middleware can do, etc. I'm just, again, going to leave it right there. All right. Now, we're not going to work with state until we get to around chapters, I think it's 8 or 9. I don't remember. I think it's 8, but I could be wrong. And basically, remember that one of the things about this is what we have been working with. Think back to yesterday, whether we were creating a model or we were creating a controller. In both those cases, they were classes. All right. And the thing about classes in an object-oriented programming language, anyone, including C#, is you want to make sure that whatever you're working with stays in a consistent state. And as mentioned right there, state refers to the current status of basically everything that's involved in the app. All right. So as they mentioned, as this app runs, it must maintain a separate state for each user currently accessing the app. And in our case, that's going to be kind of a moot point because we're going to be the only ones running it. All right. Now, you should have gotten this. Hopefully you got it from me. All right. Otherwise from Evan. HTTP is a stateless protocol. So it doesn't keep track of state between round trips. Once the browser makes a request and receives the response, the app terminates and the state is lost. That doesn't mean you can't keep state, and we'll learn how to do that, like I said, in around chapter 8 or so. As it says here, ASP.NET Core MVC does not attempt to hide this. All right. And I think when we get to that point, at least in my opinion, it'll make sense to people. All right. And they show here why it's difficult to track. And it's just the way that all of this stuff was set up. All right. In other words, what they're saying here is if I go in, let's say that I go into, if I go into Amazon, I put a book in a cart and I buy the book. And it's still me, but I decide I'm going to go in, I'm going to buy also, I don't know, a CD. All right, if people still buy CDs, but that kind of thing. As far as the system is concerned, it doesn't realize I'm even the same person. All right, typically. Now, can you get around that? Oh, you can. And to do that, you have to be able to maintain session. Good golly. In order to do that, you have to maintain session state. I hope you're still there, Grant. I'm going to try to bring this back up. I don't know what's going on. There we go. So I'm not going to sit and read this stuff to you. You can see it. And ideally, at least, it makes sense. All right. All right. Now, they do mention in here, and we are going to be using Visual Studio, which, as you know, is an IDE. We are not going to be using Visual Studio Code, which is a text editor. All right, albeit kind of a pumped up text editor, but everything that we do, we're going to be doing through Visual Studio. All right, and we've talked about that, many times. There should be nothing that's on this picture right here that should be a surprise to anybody. Okay. All right, so you know about the IntelliSense and all the other goodies, so to speak, that are in here. Notice as it says, starting in the next chapter, the book will only show the use of Visual Studio for writing our apps, even though they talk about it in the last chapter. So I'm going to skip this thing on Visual Studio Code, all right, and just jump right into here, how an ASP.NET Core MVC app works. All right. Now, one of the things that gets used here, as it says, is the ASP.NET Core MVC uses convention over configuration. What that means is there are certain things that you are expected to do when you set your system up. All right. Things that are as simple as what I told you yesterday. And what I mean is that controllers end with the name controller. All right. The system is expecting things like that. All right. However, virtually anytime you use a controller, you do not add the word controller. You may or may not have noticed that yesterday, that when we had URLs showing, it would say product, but it wouldn't say product controller. All right. All model classes should be stored in a folder named models. Some people append to the end of every one of their models, they append the name model. You can do that. All right. I believe you can even do it with views. I don't know anyone who does, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. All right. The other thing on here, as we mentioned yesterday, is a .cs HTML file is technically an HTML file that allows you to add C# code to it via the use of Razor syntax. All right. We talked about www-root yesterday and how it holds all of the static files in an application. So this is a typical kind of setup. At the end of this chapter, we won't spend much time, but we'll take a quick look at the guitar shop they have in here. And you'll notice this is, in some ways at least, this is similar to what we did yesterday. All right, I used a lot of the same names. We had a home controller and a product controller. We had a product.cs, and then we had our database simulator. All right. And we had under home, we had an about.cs HTML, an index.cs HTML, and under product, we had a detail.cs HTML and a list.cs HTML. And as always, you can see the stuff under www-root. Now, later on in the semester, and it'll be quite a bit later, we'll take our program and start separating it into areas. And the only reason I mention that is each area can have its own controllers folder, its own models folder, its own views folder. You typically don't have each one have their own www-root folder. They share that one. All right. So they give you a couple of the rules here. I think we've gone over everything that's probably the most important stuff in here. At least I believe we have. All right. All right. And again, this stuff, we did this yesterday. It either does make sense, or in my opinion, it will soon make sense to everybody watching this video. All right. Again, a model is a C# class that defines the data objects and the business rules. All right. We actually, in our example yesterday, if you think about it, in our product.cs, all right, in there, we defined basically our properties. We had a product ID, we had a name, and we had a price. And we actually had in there a business rule, which said we wanted to replace the blank spaces in every URL with dashes. All right. In addition to that, in our database simulator model, we also had rules in there that allowed us to show every single one of the objects, or whatever you want to call them, pieces or balls or whatever, that we were using yesterday. All right. and that was the get products, and we had a get product, which allowed us to look at just an individual object. We'll look here, like I said, at the end of chapter 1, they work with a guitar shop. And it's very similar again to stuff that we are going to be working on and doing ourselves. All right. So as it says here, the controller is again a C# class. I have never seen it not inherit from Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC, that controller class. All right. And notice as it says in here, an action is a method of a controller that returns an action result. We have been using that iAction result. We worked with that yesterday. We will continue to work with that all semester. There's other things that you can do, such as rather than an iAction result, you can do, I think it's an iAction redirect, where you can redirect to a different page in a program. All right, so we'll take a look at that, not now, but later. All right, and then they talk about the detail method, and they talk about the list method. The list method is very similar to what we did yesterday. So is the detail method. But again, with the detail method, we didn't worry about the pretty URLs, or they're not worrying about it in here. All right. So again, this should look very similar. And as I mentioned yesterday, I showed you 3 ways to do what they're showing in this second line. You can put a question mark here. You can do it the way they've done it, or you can set this equal to double quote, double quote. All right. When looking around, because I try to look at a lot of code before I teach a class, it seems more often than not, they just put the question mark right there. All right. And as we mentioned yesterday, you wouldn't want to put a question mark when you have a price. I have seen the price already where they default it and set it equal to 0, or in this case, 0M, or decimal, where they convert it and put in a 0, something like that. All right. So when you look in here, again, this should look very similar to what we did yesterday. Again, no, it is not identical. All right. But the idea and what's coming back is similar. All right. So in here, they're calling get product and they're passing an ID, and they're returning that individual product to the detail view. Here, it's get products, so they're returning all of the products back to the list view. And again, there is their explanation. I don't want to talk it to death where, it's like, oh my God, shut up. But I also want to make sure, and I believe at least, if you read through this chapter, in my opinion at least, it makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing about this, it's a little different. Again, this is me speaking. This is not out of the book or anything else. But I think when you compare what we're doing now to what we've done in C# in the past, most of the stuff we did with C#, especially in that book before we got into classes, was more straightforward than this. All right. And what I mean is now, sometimes you got to do something to affect something else, to affect something else. Whereas earlier when we were working with just straight C#, a button was a button. You clicked on it and it did something. All right. All right. So how Vue uses Razor code, tag helpers, and Bootstrap CSS classes. They really could have included JavaScript or jQuery classes in there as well. All right. So as it says, a file can contain Razor code that allows you to use C# to get data from a model, format it, and display it. That code always must begin with the @, as we've talked about earlier. This is where it gets a little hinky, and I did mention this yesterday, but I want to make sure to say it again because it's a little bit different. So as it says, to start the @model directive specifies the class for the model, but the @model with a capital M property allows you to display the pieces, so to speak, of that model object. All right, and it's a little bit different and it takes some getting used to. All right, and as they mention here, after the at model directive, you've got the at sign followed by curly braces. In here, what most of the time what gets done is this is where you go in and you set up your title. All right, up here you set the title up, but you set it up dynamically. Okay, all right. And there can be other stuff in there too. I mean, we put the for each had to be in, for example, a razor block, that kind of thing. In a view, as it says, all HTML attributes that start with ASP dash are tag helpers. So they are defining something specific to ASP.NET, either ASP dash controller to let you know what controller you're working with, ASP dash action to let you know what method in the controller you're working with. And there's also ASP dash route if there has to be some special routing done. There's other tag helpers as well. And I believe I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if it's chapter 14 or 15, but one of those two is all on tag helpers. All right. In a view, as it says, it's common to use Bootstrap. Why? Because Bootstrap is pretty much universally supported and most people are fairly comfortable with it. Now, you may or may not have heard of this, but there is also a package, it is not Bootstrap, that is called Tailwind. All right. And Tailwind is sort of an up and comer where many people like to use that instead of Bootstrap. They find it easier to work with. There may be some kind of an add-on that you can put in for ASP.NET to use Tailwind. I just have never checked it out one way or the other. All right. So again, this is the code that's in here. And as I mentioned, at the top, you use at model, all right, with a small m. And when you use it and you pull apart its pieces, it's at model with a large M. You know, and as you probably guess, if you were to reverse these, you're going to get errors all over the place. So, all right. Again, this is very similar to what we did yesterday. All right. I mean, I thought of actually just using the one that we did that's in the book, but I thought, well, let's do something from scratch. To me, there's always something to be said for doing that, especially on day one. All right. Again, I think we've gone over everything that's in here. Take a look at it. And as always, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. All right. Then we've got the program.cs file, and it says it configures the middleware. That had all those app dot, use this, app dot, use that kind of thing. As it says in here, the program.cs file begins by building a web application builder object. Then it adds these things that are called services. And you saw that yesterday. We took some of those services out, modified some services. I don't think we added any new services, but it's possible to do that as well. The bottom, as it says there with that map controller route, you are going to learn this as you go on in this class, and that is how to do mapping. All right. So yesterday we came in and we got rid of this if statement and we replaced it with an app.use. It was a different kind of exception helper, like developer exception helper or something like that. All right. But my hope is when you look at this table right here, that everything that's in that table makes sense. All right. That local host is always going to be followed by a random port number. All right. But if you put nothing after it, it should default to home index. If you put home after it, it should be home index. Home about should be home about, and then the two product things. I'm hoping at least that the stuff that they put in there, just by its very nature, makes sense. All right. And again, as always, if I'm wrong, you're going to have to let me know. All right. So that's it for chapter 1. And maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree. Yeah, there was some new stuff in there. But between what we went over yesterday and what we already had as far as static data and as far as dynamic data, there wasn't a lot of new stuff in here. All right. The summaries in these books are pretty good. As I mentioned to the class this morning, I typically don't go through them. All right. There's just too many other things to do. Now, if we do go and take a look at exercise 1-1, let's try that. All right. So what I'm going to do, and you can do it, you can watch, it's totally up to you, of course. And as you know, I can't see what you're doing anyway, but I'm going to go over here to the C drive, and mine stuff is under a folder called Muroc. And it's in here. And I'm going to try this student download exercise. Let's do the exercise solutions. All right. And you'll notice, okay, I guess that's future value. So that's going to start on chapter 2. Fine. The starts. All right. That starts on chapter 2 as well. So let's go to book apps over here. All right. And here's the guitar shop rather. All right. So if we bring this thing up, and we won't spend much time on this. You can see we've got our typical kind of setup in here. All right. We've got a controllers folder with our home controller and our product controller. We've got our models and what I call database simulator in there. They're just calling db.cs, but you'll notice they're seeding the data just like we did yesterday. All right. Much of that code is almost identical. Their product is very similar to what we did yesterday. All right. And even their views are very similar. So if I run this, as you know, this comes up in another browser window, again, with our HTTP localhost followed by a random port. If it ever does come up, says it's still running. There we go. All right. So we've got view. That was an individual product. We've got view all products, and we can grab an individual product. All right. And we've got an about us page. All right. This is, like I said, you can tell this is, I based what we did yesterday off of this one. All right. But by now, and if you haven't done so, all right, not this second, of course, but please take a look at this. And if there's things in here that don't make sense, come back and ask. All right. There may be times when you ask me, why did they do things like, and I've kind of adopted the philosophy this semester. I was talking to the class this morning and I said, this is not profound or anything, but I said, I don't make the rules. I'm just playing the game. All right. And I think you understand what I mean by that. And that is, there are times it's like, why did they do it like this? Why did they do it like that? Because someone who was working for Microsoft decided it was going to be done that way. Now, we didn't do this, but we could have like maybe had a featured product or something like that in there where we would have come out and done that. What you're going to see in a later iteration of this example that's right here, what you're going to see here is we're going to bring in images as well, and we'll do that in our what will be our stuff that we're working on too. Please notice that again in here, when we go to product detail, it's Fender Stratocaster. If I grab a different one, this Ludwig 5-piece drum set with cymbals, again, we have gone in and using that slug, we have replaced all blank spaces with dashes. All right. So I talked with Evan about this, and one thing he did last summer that I didn't do was in most of the chapters, he did go through these exercises at the end of the chapter because there was something that students had. So if they didn't understand something, they could bring it up on screen, take a look at it, and ask questions if necessary. But it was typically going to be something similar, at least in nature, to what we'd already been working on. So we did this, we started it up, we ran it. All right, we can close it. I mean, it's no biggie. We could close it right now. But then here, they just want you to do it off of VS Code. Again, anything in this book that runs off of VS Code, I am skipping. All right. And I did ask Evan, just so you know, last semester, he did the same. All right, so I can go in now and I can close this. You may or may not have noticed too that when you open this, you also get this file. All right, and that's a bunch of the system stuff that's running in the background. In fact, if I hit the space bar, that stops the run. That's one way you can end it, as opposed to coming up here and ending it like we usually do. All right, so let's jump into chapter 2. As they say in here, this chapter how to develop a one-page ASP.NET Core MVC app that does future value. All right, it says to do that, it uses Visual Studio. Good, because that's what we want to use. All right, so if we break this down, what do we have in here? I'm going to create this. All right, and knowing me, I may or may not make any mistakes. I don't have this. I did not do this ahead of time. I did do the one from scratch ahead of time, but I didn't do the one I believe in here that has everything in it. I don't remember. I don't think this one is from scratch, but we'll see. All right, so it's how to create a core web MVC app, how to run a web app and fix errors, how to work with a model, how to organize files, how to validate user input. So we're going to run through all of this. All right. And if we run through all of it, we only need one copy of it, so to speak, and we're done, for example, by 2 or 2:30, we might just be done for the day. All right, we'll see how it goes. All right, so again, like I said, I'm just going to follow this. All right. In fact, why don't we do it like this? All right, it says here, to create a web app, you start by creating a new project. When you create this, it provides several templates. You know that already. The one ASP.NET Core MVC model template, as it says, because it automatically adds for you what? It adds the www root folder. All right. It adds the controllers folder and it puts a home controller in it. It adds a models folder and it's got the error model in it. It's got a views folder and that views folder has a home folder in it with an index and I think a .cshtml and a privacy chhtml. Plus it has your partial files in it that we talked about yesterday. All right. So as it says, you get that with that template. So it says in this book, you'll learn how to use the two templates summarized. Well, the one is what I told you. The other one is empty. So that's what they're saying here. This is what you get with the web AVC template, and this is what you get with the empty one. All right. And there are other ones, and as they say, you may or may not want to explore those on your own. But let's do this. I don't know if I'm going to be following what's in the book or not. I just one day randomly went out and started building this future value thing myself. And I started with ASP.NET Core empty. All right, so that's what I'm going to do right now. And again, the reason I'm going to do this, it is not totally out of the question that if you were to finish this class and say, you know, I kind of like this, I want to be an ASP.NET developer, that if you went into to interview at a place, more and more of these places are making you go through some kind of a test. And it's not impossible that the test you could go through, they would say start with an ASP.NET Core empty project, just to see if you could add all the stuff yourselves. All right. When I did it, I got it to work. All right. I did it nice and slow. And I'm going to do the same thing here. All right. As we do this. So I'm going to start up. In fact, let's do this. That is, I'm going to come in and create a brand new folder here. It'll be empty. And I'm going to call it future value. All right, just that, just future value like that. All right, now I'm going to start up Visual Studio. I am going to go to create a new project. All right, and again, I don't want the ASP core, etc. I want the empty one. So I'm going to try ASP.NET core. They have one that's empty. There it is. So I'm going to start with that. All right, and I'm going to click next. And again, we'll just call this future value for the project name and for the folder name, or I'm sorry, and for the solution name. And we're putting into a folder as well that's called future value. All right. We again, this is more or less, this is almost like the forms that we built either in C# or in JavaScript. So we're not going to worry about HTTPS in here. We do want .NET 7, but all these we'll leave unchecked. All right. And we'll click create. And notice right away, once it comes up, how different this looks. All right. Can we run it? Okay. We get hello world. That's kind of weird. All right. And I would be wrong here. I think if we go to program.cs, that's where we're getting that from. So we're going to change that later because we don't want to run our program and have it say hello world. All right. So let's start with this. Okay. And that is, I'm going to close this and I'm just going to start adding folders. So underneath here, all right, this is, oops, I don't need that. I'm sorry. Underneath our solution, and let me close this. Come on, close. There we go. Under our solution here, I'm first going to right mouse click and I'm going to add a new folder. And I'm going to call that new folder. Oops, not under my solution. Let me go back and redo that. Let me delete this. My error. Under our project, right mouse click, choose add folder. All right. And the first one we will add will be www root. And that's all in lowercase by convention. All right. Then the next thing we will do is we will come in and you'll notice it immediately changed the icon, even though I added it as a quote regular folder, unquote. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add another folder and we're going to call that folder controllers. And it won't change that. It'll look like a folder. Then underneath that, we are going to come in and add another folder that is called, oops, models. And we're going to add another folder underneath there as well. All right, that is going to be called views. All right. Then under our views folder, we're going to add yet another folder that we're going to call shared. All right. Now, not totally, but it is now looking more like a quote regular ASP.NET project that we would build where we use the ASP.NET Core model view controller as opposed to empty. All right, just by putting in those folders. So let's start by going into folders, into models here rather, and I'm going to add a new class. And as I mentioned, you don't have to do this, but this is a future value model. So I'm going to call it that, future value model.cs. Again, some people who consider themselves more purists always put the word model on the end of their model. Other people leave them off. With so much of this stuff, as you know by now, it's a matter of taste. You know, what do you think? That's what you do, type of an idea. All right, so let's come in here. And first, let's add our properties. And there will be 3 of them. All right. Now, the first thing to notice when you look in here is it's like, where's the ID? We're not working in this particular program. We're not doing a lick in here, absolutely nothing with a database or simulating a database. So we don't have that. All right. The other thing that we're going to put into here is we're actually going to put in a formula right in the model, because remember, we can add, this is our data, but we can also add our business logic. So we're going to put that in here. We're going to have public decimal, and we'll call it calculate future value. All right. And as always, if you don't know anything about future value, basically what it's saying is if you put in money and you leave it for a certain amount of time at a certain interest rate, you should be getting more money back than what you put in, type of an idea. Okay. Well, notice what we have in here. We have a yearly interest rate, but we're going to compound that monthly. So we're going to come in here and create a variable called months. And we're going to set that variable equal to years times 12. And that should make sense. All right. In that, all right, if I put in 10 years, if I put 10 in for the number of years, when we create a form later, the number of months will be 120, type of an idea. All right. Then we've got a yearly interest rate, but we want a monthly one. So we want a decimal. We move this over a bit. And we will have monthly interest rate, and we'll set that equal to the yearly interest rate divided by 12 divided by 100. That is our monthly interest rate. Finally, we'll put in our future value. And we'll initialize that to 0M. All right, like that. Now, we could have put an M here and we could have put an M there. I don't think it would matter. I didn't do it, but I don't think the system would care at all. I mean, that's kind of being more purist, so to speak. We're getting this error because we're not returning anything. We're getting this warning because we're not using that variable. So let's do that. All right. You can go online to find the formula that I'm going to put in. It's no biggie at all. All right. So it's a for loop. And not a for each, but a regular for loop. I always use LCV for loop control variable. All right, so we're going to go through by months. Now, I did put a thing in here, so if you want to see it, and if you care, it's omnicalculator.com/finance. slash future dash value pound sign future value. I think that was the whole thing. Let me see here. No, it's future value formula. Just wanted you to know where I got that from. That's all. And so it's future value is equal to, and I'm going to separate this out into two lines. All right. So it's equal to, oops, I'm sorry. Let's try that again. It's equal to, we want this here. And I'm going to put it here, future value times monthly investment. All right. And we take that and we multiply that, put that on a new line, by 1 times the monthly interest rate. And again, if you want a better description, because I'm not giving you one, but if you want a better description of what's going on there, you can go out to the URL that I alluded to up there. All right. And once we fall out, we want to return future value. That is right there. Move this down. That right there is our entire calculate. Well, up here, I guess. That's our future value model. So we've got 3 properties, or 2 are decimal for monthly investment, for a yearly interest rate, and for years. Later, we're going to create a form, and these are the 3 fields that are going to be in it. All right. Those are the 3 fields for which we have to provide our input. Then, once we put those in, we will click a button and we will figure this out, our future value, and we will figure out our future value using the formula right here. All right. Hopefully everything I've said so far has made at least some sense. I'm going to do a file save all. I'm going to close this, at least for now. I don't need this either, so I'm going to close this. And it is just about 1:03. Let's take 12 minutes. Well, I'm going to leave this clock up. We'll come back at 1:15 and we'll continue on. The next thing we're going to do is add our controllers. Then we're going to add our views and we'll take it from there and see what happens. Okay. All right. I'll be back. I want to get it and replace my water. I'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, it is 1:15, so I'm going to continue on. So far we've come in here and we've added the folders. We've got an empty www root folder, an empty controllers folder, a models folder for which we provided a future value model, a views folder which has a shared folder in it. So let's go on. We're only going to have, I believe, one controller in here. So I'm going to add a new controller. It'll be an MVC controller empty, and it'll be home controller.cs, which is the name it gives you by default. All right. So I'm going to click add. Now, a couple things about this that you should already, hopefully at least, realize. First is, and we talked about this earlier, you will have this using statement in virtually any controller you create. Second, the controller you create should always be appended with the word controller on the end, and by default, it is inheriting from asp.net.mvc.controller. All right. Now, believe it or not, and I'm going to put this in here and it's going to be wrong. I'm going to get an error, but there's a reason I'm doing this. All right. I'm going to put in here public iAction result index. Now we're going to change it in just a minute. All right. But I want it to look for now, at least, just like the other one. Now, you know this. You meaning anybody watching this live or on tape. What it just did is illegal. All right. But I can overload this method as long as I put something in there. And that's what I'm going to do in a moment. But I want you to realize, because we're going to add a couple attributes onto this. All right. When we want to display the form, which is what we're going to be, basically, that's our view, then this is going to be a get. All right. On the other hand, when we want to submit the form or view, then it's going to be an HTTP post. Now you'll notice that even doing that, I still have the error. And the reason that I still have the error is the signatures for this are identical, which is not allowed. All right. Well, what are we going to want to be submitting in here? And the answer is we're going to want to be submitting a future value model. All right. And I will call it FV for future value. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. All right. So for now, at least, I'm going to leave that in there. Now notice the errors are gone, but there's more that we want to do. The first thing we want to do in here, and I'm just putting this in as a comment, and that is start with a clean slate. So in other words, by default, what's going to happen is we're not going to have a future value because this is showing the form. So there should not be a future value in that form. Well, we don't have a variable in here in the controller. We do not have a variable called future value, but we could make one. And again, we can use that view bag. So I'm going to say view bag, and you'll notice when I put in a dot, the view bag has no IntelliSense because it's just something that's available to us. So I'm going to say viewbag.futureValue, and I'm just going to set it equal to the empty string. All right. And that will make sure that when we start and we bring this up, that there's no previous future value calculation in there. That's all we're doing here. All right. Then when we come in here, well, what do we want to do? Well, think about for a second what we want to do. All right, we're going to have a future value model that has these three pieces of information in it. They're all numbers, so none of them can be left blank. The years is an integer, so it must be a whole number. Again, that should hopefully at least just be stuff that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to validate my data. How am I going to do that? I'm going to come in here and there is something that is actually called model state. So if, model state dot is valid, not list, is valid. All right. Well, what do we know? Okay. We know that we've put in valid stuff. Now, don't worry. You say, well, what about negative numbers? We'll handle that in a bit. All right. But for now, what we care about is we have put numeric values in for all three of the text boxes that we're going to have on a form. All right. So we can now say view bag dot future value equals FV, this thing, dot, and what does that have available to us? Well, look at the first thing that's in there. Calculate future value. All right. But that's going to give us, again, we want to be able to format that. We'd like it to look like it's a dollar and cents thing. So we can do a .to string and format it like that. All right. And I didn't put the dot in there. There. So what we're saying is when we submit this, if everything that we put in there was numeric, go ahead and call my function to figure out the future value. And once you get it, you're going to end up eventually putting it in at the bottom of our form and formatting it as a decimal. All right. But if there's something wrong, so if this failed, all right, I'm going to say else. And I'm just going to say view bag dot future value equals nothing. I'm just going to make sure it has nothing at all in it. And then we'll return the view. All right. That's all we have to do. Now, notice that the only thing, what do we have in here? We've got index, right? So I believe at least the only thing we're going to have to do is eventually we're going to have to go into our views. We're going to have to add a home folder and we're going to have to add an index.cshtml into there. All right. And hopefully that makes sense. All right. So that's everything that's in here. You'll notice that it automatically brought in that using statement so that we're able to use the model. I didn't put that in. It just got added for me. So I'm going to do a file save all. We can't really run it yet. We don't even have an interface. There is no view or anything in there right now, but we're getting there. We now have a controller and we have a model. So let's work on the last part of this here. All right. And that is, let's start working in the view area. All right. So under shared here, right here, let's go in and let's add a new view. So add a view. It'll be a view, razor view empty. And you may or may not remember this, but our layout is in a file called underscore layout.cshtml, like that. And it gives us this garbage in here that we don't even need. It's just basically in there like a comment. Now we can put whatever we want to put in here. All right. What I did, and I don't know if it's the right way of doing it, but I went back here into Visual Studio Code. All right. And I just did the exclamation point tab to give me this stuff. All right. So I grabbed all of this. I'm going to go down to the title here and I'll just grab everything that's right there. I'm not going to use all of it, but I'm going to grab all of that. All right. So let me put that in here. I want the doc type. I want the HTML statement. You can already tell by looking at this, I need an ending body statement and I need an ending HTML statement. All right. But I want the meta. I don't want my title to be this. Let's just call it future value calculator. We can call it whatever we want. All right, in fact, let's not even do that. What's one thing that we learned yesterday? I can come in here and do an at viewbag dot title, and I can dynamically fill that up. So we'll do that. All right. So our head is done, but there's nothing in the body. You may or may not remember this from yesterday, but what we need to do in here is we need to put an at render body right there. All right. So right now, at least, that's what we want to do. We don't need to put in the other at render. We don't even have a footer in here. So we don't need to worry about that. But this right now is our layout. All right, our main page layout or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we've got that. Now you may or may not remember. Let me do a file, save all, and let me close this. But we also had two files right under views. One was called underscore view start, and one was called underscore view imports. So let's add those. So here I'm going to add, what's that?
Can you go and show your the layout
Sure,
file for just
right
1
here.
second?
Sure, I'll leave that up. Tell me when you're ready.
Thank you. That's all I needed.
Okay, not a problem. I appreciate the conversation. All right, so I'm going to come in and under views, I'm going to add another view right under the view menu. And the first one doesn't matter the order in which you do this, but I'm going to put it empty. And this is going to be underscore view start dot CS HTML. Again, these are just, this is junk. We don't need it. We need to literally put in here 3 lines, and they're all razor code. It's the same thing we had in here yesterday, and that is layout equals underscore layout, which says that the file that we're going to be using as our layout file is this one that we just added here. That's all it's saying. All right. So again, that is underscore view start dot CSHTML. Now, in order for us to also be able to come in here and use tag helpers, we're going to add one more file right under views. So we're going to add another view, a razor view empty, and this is underscore view imports dot CSHTML. Now you may get rid of the garbage in here. You may or may not remember from yesterday, we had 3 lines in here where we had at model stuff, but that was for the database stuff. We don't need that. So we only need 1 line in here, and that is at add tag helper asterisk, which means we want to make all of them available to us. And where do those live? Under Microsoft .ASP.NET Core .MVC .tag helpers. That's it. All right. I'm not sure why at times certain things are certain colors, but that should be correct the way that it is. All right. And when you work with this stuff, typically case does matter. So please put it in the way that I put it in. All right. Now we're getting there. So let me save this. And I'm hoping you have it. And if you don't, you'll let me know. So I'm going to close my view imports, my view start, and my layout file. All right. But as mentioned previously, the next thing that I want to do is under views, right underneath here, I want another folder. I'm going to close that, but I want another folder, and that will be my home folder. All right. Okay. And under the home folder, I want to make a new razor view empty called index.cshtml. All right. And then I'm going to show you something that's a little different. You might say it's cool, you might not, I don't know, but I'm going to make a view here, and it'll be a razor view empty. And again, it will be index.cshtml, which is the default when there's nothing there. So I'm hitting empty, or hitting enter rather. I don't want any of this. All right. Now, what we did in the past is we said stuff like this. We said either like at model, and then we would say something like we did yesterday, where we would give the name of the model, like future value model. But you'll notice that if we do that, it's giving us an error. And it says, I don't know what it is you're trying to do. There's two ways of fixing this. The reason I decided to show it to you like this is I want to show you that we can fix it in here, or we can go in and we can fix it in our imports file. I'm going to first fix it in here by prefacing this with future value model dot. All right, that is one way, even though it looks funky right here. All right. And we can do it like that, future value model dot, in fact, I think it's got to be dot models dot future value model. I think that's right. I'm sorry, it's the name we used up here. Future value, that's the name of our project, dot models for our models folder, dot future value model. That's one way to fix it. So the name of the project, dot, the name of the models folder, dot, the name of the model that we want to put in there. All right. That's not bad. I mean, it wasn't a lot of work, but you may or may not know how to do that. And I don't want to do that much work in here. I just wanted to say this. But again, when I put that in, it's eventually going to give me an error. It won't like it. But what I can do, all right, what I can do is I can go back into, all right, I can go back into the, where is it? Where are we? The view imports file here, and above that one, because that one usually is put in last, okay, I can put in a using line here. So I can say at using future value dot models, like that. There's no errors. And notice now if I go back to here, it's fat and happy, so to speak. So you can do it either way. You can either add this as I showed right here, all right, or we can go back to the file itself and do an at model, the name of the project, dot, the name of the models folder, dot, the name of the model. All right. And it's not even so much that, what way is preferred? You can do it either way. All right. Sometimes what ends up happening is you might have several models in here, and that can get a little bit unwieldy with all that. That's why a lot of times people do it like this and put all those using statements in there. But either way will work. All right. So I'm in here now. And the next thing I want to do, and you may or may not remember this, but we already referenced it earlier, and that is we want to come in and we want to dynamically add the title. So that's the next thing we want to do. And we're doing that using Razor code and view bag. Notice if I put in a dot, it still doesn't have that, even though we already used it. We say title equal, and again, that's our title that'll be up in here when we run the program. And I'm just going to put in here future value calculator. Again, we could put anything at all that we wanted in there. All right, it's ours. We can put in there whatever we want to put in there. I don't need that. So let's start building this now. This is a view. So let's start to build it. All right, we'll start with an H1 tag, and I'll put in here future value calculator. And again, I know you're all smart enough to get this, but I do want you to realize when we run the program, all right, the thing for the title is what's going to go up here. All right. And this is just going to be on right up above our form as an H1 tag. So now we make a form. All right. And whoops. And in our form, we're going to use a tag helper. Okay. We wanted to let it know the ASP action is index. And we also wanted to know that the method is host. Now, one thing we don't have in here, I guess post should be all lowercase. All right, one thing we don't have in here that we have been using, and that is ASP controller equal home. We only have one controller in this program. So we can put this in. There's nothing wrong at all with putting it in. But since we only have one controller, it's kind of redundant to put it in. But whether you put that in or you don't put that in, it's all a matter, again, of personal preference. Again, we don't have an area in here, but we could say, like we did yesterday, ASP area equals nothing. You could do that too. That's a dash, and that's why I'm getting the error there. We could do that. If you've ever heard the word superfluous, that's what this is. We don't have an area. And I even said yesterday we could have removed that. We're using our home controller. Unless you feel like that is more self-documenting, yeah, I want that in there, then leave it in there. It isn't hurting anything, but it's basically it's extra information that is really unnecessary. All right. It's redundant information. I guess you could say that. All right. So let's create our form. Now, just so you know, if I go back to the book here, I showed you this yesterday, and unfortunately, I don't remember what the page number was, but it's quite a bit up. I think it's must be coming. There it is. All right, so that's what we want to do. When you look at this, what do you see? Well, we've already got our H1. We can go in later and make it blue if we want to. That's no biggie. All right, but all right, we want a label that says monthly investment, followed by a text box for the monthly investment. Then we want a label that says yearly interest rate, followed by a label for the yearly interest rate. Then we want a number of years with a label and a number of years for this. And finally, we want this and this. Now, we probably should make this read-only. I didn't do that, but because I didn't think about it, but we can put a read-only property in there. I think we can, at least it shouldn't hurt anything. But this is basically right here. That's everything we need. Now, I don't remember because I'm having a brain fart right now, but I want to see if I can come into here and say class equal text slash primary. I want to see if that's going to give me any error. Well, it didn't, and I'm hoping that's going to make it blue. All right. Again, I'm just trying to make it look like it does with what they just showed us in the book. All right. So I'm going to put each one of these things, I'm going to have a div. So I'm going to have a div, and inside of there, I'll have the label for the monthly investment and the text box. Then do it for yearly interest rate, then do it for years, then do it for future value. And then on the bottom, it was a button that was called calculate. and that there was a link that said clear. All right, and that is our entire form. So let's start this. And again, we could go in and add if we want to do coloring and all sorts of other stuff here. So this is just a regular label. All right, but it's ASP for, and it's monthly investment. All right, and notice the IntelliSense picked it up. Now that's just that's the value that it's pertaining to, but we can call this monthly investment. We don't need to give it, we can give it a blank space because this is just a title. All right, so there's our label. And then we actually need an input, which again will have an ASP 4. All right, and that's going to be equal to, again, monthly investment. Just like that. Okay, so that is right there. That is our first one. Okay, let's do the other 2 or 3 that we have to do. I think I think they said in here yearly interest rate. Okay. Then our next one, which is our number of years. We didn't call it number of years, we just called it years. Oops, move that up. And again, when I say this stuff, I never mean to insult anyone's intelligence. But that said, this name, monthly investment, yearly interest rate, and years, they're all taken right from a model. Monthly investment, yearly interest rate, and years. So if I had to change that, for example, in here, I'm not. But if I had changed that to number of years, then this would have to be number of years as well. And as you saw, the IntelliSense picked it up. Now, this last one, there is no ASP4 in here. This is just an HTML label. Right? And this is also going to be a label, so we can make it, so we don't even have to make it read only. And what is it? It's at viewbag dot future value, because we've already figured out what the future value is. And if we haven't, it's empty. All right. So hopefully you can understand that. Let me move this down just a real little bit like that. This right here is this right here. The only thing I have to add is a button and clear. And after we post, we'll try this one eventually and see if we get that amount. All right. So I'm going to come down here and I'm still in my form. I could do it outside of the form, but for whatever reason, I put it in the form. But button, type equal, submit. And it said calculate. And then we had the hyperlink. And that'll be an action. And it'll say equals index. All right, so we can go back to our home when we clear. Now, again, I didn't do it on there. We could have said ASP-controller equal home. So again, if you find that more self-documenting, that's totally fine. And again, as we did before, we could put in the ASP hyphen area equals nothing. All right. I think that's a little too much, but we could have done that. All right. Now, just so you know, if we save everything and we run it, you may or may not have guessed this, but what do we get? Hello world. All right. The program in that program.cs file is what's in there. All right. So what do I mean? Well, what we want to do, let me do a file save all. All right. And I'm going to close all this stuff, at least for now. We might open some of it later, but I'm going to go back into this program.cs file right there. All right. And this app.mapget, I'm getting rid of that right now. All right. I'm going to change that. So let me remove it. And I'm going to put app.use endpoints. All right. Like they show here. All right. And eventually I will put in a curly brace. So we'll put this on a new line there. And this curly brace is typically, you see it on the same line as that. It's going to look like this. It's giving me an error because I haven't put in a route yet. So endpoints dot map controller route. All right. And we have to let it know what that is. Let me get that garbage out of there. All right. The name is default. All right. And the pattern is controller, name, hyphen, action, index. I think I'm doing this right, but I'm doing part of it off the top of my head. So we'll find out in a minute. And this is not mandatory, an ID. So let's see if we put that in and then this and save. All right, it doesn't like something. We're going to fix it, right? Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't like. We don't need either of those. Well, I thought that would have cleaned it up, but we'll see. Oh, we don't. Let's see. Not that. We do need here. We need that. Okay. We don't need this. All right. We're almost there. We'll get it. So app.use endpoints. We've got endpoints there. All right. Our curly brace. We're ending it. All right. This right. Whoops. This right here. I'll show you what the error is if it'll let me move there. Got it. This left paren that you see in here, that's with this stuff. Let me take everything that's here and tab it over. And then let me come down here and put in that. All right, we're getting there. So just give me a second. It's app.use endpoints, exactly as it's shown there, endpoints, and then we're setting up our route. So endpoints.map controller route is default, and the pattern, I don't know why I put name there. I thought this was, maybe it is name. I thought it was home there, but let's see. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is. Okay, this default has to be in double quotes. Okay, so endpoints.map controller route, left paren, name, default, and then pattern. This needs a semicolon on the end. All right. So what doesn't it like? App is not null here. Yeah, I know it's not null there. Now, I think I wrote this right, just so you know, but what I'm going to do real quickly is I'm going to go back to what we looked at yesterday. All right, yesterday we wrote that the store, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at my program.cs file down at the bottom. There that is, right there. I'm going to try to copy it so I can see if what I typed in was actually incorrect or not incorrect. So let me comment this out and let me paste that in. And there is no error now. So what is wrong here? All right. Well, I want to use the use endpoints. I don't think it's going to work with map controller route, but I could be wrong. Let's see. I'm going to leave this the way it is, and I'm going to save the program and run it. Now, what should happen when I do this, if it all works like it should, is it's going to run, but my form is not formatted at all, so it'll look terrible. All right, we'll worry about that momentarily, but let's see if this runs if we run it. No. System invalid operation, unable to find the required services. Okay, so I'm missing a service. I'm trying to figure out what that service is. All right, I'm going to come in here and change that to this. And I want to see if when I do that, if it's going to give me an error or not. I don't need two apps in there. All right, it does not like this. Name is default. I'm going to take this one and remove it and bring my other one back. All right, we're going to get it. I'm not worried about this. We'll get it. And I'm getting to the point right now in my career here. I'm kind of liking it when I get errors. All right, because it's making me think. So it's app.use endpoints, then set up your endpoint, curly brace. All right, and it's still giving me that. Trying to get my error here. Endpoints is not null here. All right, so endpoints.map controller route. Okay, name default. Okay, pattern controller dash name slash action dash index slash ID. All right, then we've got this, and again, this can be moved over, and then we've got this. So it says type or namespace definition or end of file expected. I thought we needed still the app run. I think that's going to give me an error if I remove that, because that's telling it to run the program. All right. There's an error in here. I do have a working version of it on my other machine here. So let me look and see what I did wrong. I think this is where I have it. Find out right now. All right. That is not it. Trying to figure out what I did there. Well, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to end up writing a lot of this by hand. All right, I'm going to take this whole thing here and out, and then go in and basically write the equivalent of this by hand. Okay, so I need my namespace, and this is future value in curly braces. All right. Basically, what I'm redoing is I'm redoing my own main here, and I'm not sure why I would have to. I really and truly don't know. All right, that should look familiar to you. And in here, we call a create host builder dot build dot run. And I think it's going to end up needing a using statement here. Nope. Oh, we'll have to generate that. We'll do that in a minute. All right, so right underneath here, we're going to put in public static iHost builder, create host builder, string bracket bracket args, host dot default builder with args, dot configure web host defaults web builder, web builder dot use startup. I'm not sure this is going to work, so I mean it's not worth copying down or anything. So, all right, that's what you normally run. I don't know what this is going to do anything or give me an error. System not supported. Oh, okay. I'll have to add some using statements up here. I don't know if these are going to be needed or not. All right, so let me stop the run and try it again. So file, save all. Let's try it again. Son of a gun. Startup isn't supported. Using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Hosting, using Microsoft.Extensions.Configuration, using Microsoft.Extensions.Hosting, using Microsoft.Extensions.Logging. Let's look here. Let's see. You don't want to install any packages. We don't want that to be iStartup. We don't want it to be startup base. Well, it is too. Let's just take a 10-minute break and I'll see if I can figure it out during the break. All right. We will get this working. All right. If nothing else, I'll pull up my original one and we'll get it working. All right. Grant, I don't know if you're back yet or not. Are you?
Yeah, I just sat down.
Oh, okay. What I did was rather than writing my own where I was fumbling, I went back and used the one that we had been using. So this works. And this is what you get by default in your program.cs file, all of this. All right.
Okay.
So what I did was I commented that out. We don't need that. And I replaced these lines with this line. So you don't need this that's commented out here. This will work though, just to show you, and I'll leave it up there, but just to show you, when I run it now, this is what I get. And I should be able to, what were the numbers that they used? I'm going to try to use their same numbers. Well, that's fine. But I'll run it just to put something in there. So monthly investment, $300. Interest rate, we'll say 5%. Number of years. Future value. Oh, there's nothing in there, but we'll see if we can fix that in a second. And clear. Okay. We haven't basically set that up yet, and we will. All right. But this is all correct. Let me make this a little smaller so you can see everything. All right, I'll give you a second. If you do want to type that in, you can, or you can copy it in from your previous program. Either way would work.
Okay, I just copied it in from the store, so hopefully I'm good.
I hope so. That's what I did. So, and again, I made sure that you didn't have to, but I uncommented what was in there. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we are setting up our default route, which we didn't have before. In here, all it had was hello world. Now we're telling it that if we do list, if we don't list a controller, it'll be the home. If we don't list an action, it'll be index. Well, what do we have in this program? We've got a home controller with an index action. That's really all we have. We're not working with an ID here. Okay. So we actually probably could even just remove this. I'm not going to, but we really could. All right. Now that's all fine. And I don't care about it working or not working, but I care about a couple things here. All right, so I'm going to do a file save all. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my model back up because now we're going to add some validation. All right. And the way that we're going to add this validation is we're going to make 3 of these fields required. All right. And we're going to make sure that if you don't put them in, we're going to give you an error message. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say required, followed immediately by error message equal. And you could put whatever you'd like in here, but I'll just say, please enter a monthly investment. Okay. No, I didn't spell required wrong. What is wrong with this? No. Could not be found. Show potential fixes. Well, one of the things that was in there was a using statement. I must have left out. Okay, we need this at the top. Using system.component.data annotations. All right. I'm going to copy this line right here. And I'm going to put it here and I'm going to put it here, but just change the message. So this will say monthly investment. This next one here will, well, how about here? We'll say number of years. And this one will say yearly interest rate. And you might find that doing it like this, that putting in a little white space may end up helping a bit like that. All right. Now we can run this and we can leave it blank, and our errors will not appear yet. I want to say that again. We can run this. All right, we can run it, and we can leave everything blank, and we won't get our error messages. Let's see if indeed that's true. I'll come back to this. So if you're still typing, so save all, and let's run this. Now I'm putting nothing in there, and I'm clicking calculate, and I don't get any errors. And the reason I'm not getting any errors, all right, is I've never added an ASP.NET validation summary. So let's see if we add one of those. All right, let's see if we add one of those. So I'm going to go in here, and I am going to go into home index.cshtml. All right, and then right above the form, after our beginning form tag, I'm going to put in here another div. It's very short. P validation summary equals all, which means catch every error that we just put in here. So we added this line right here. Again, if you want some white space in there to make that read a little better. So we added that line right after the beginning of our form, which says basically, all right, we want to include, okay, we want to include this stuff. Now, guess what? When we run this, I don't think we're going to get our error messages. Please enter this, please enter that, but we should get an error message now. So let's see. So let me do a file, save all. We run this again. We should not get any errors for running it. I'm going to leave it blank, and I'm going to click calculate. But we get the value here is invalid. All right. And the reason that we're getting these default errors, all right, is we have to go back, and this is weird kind of, but in our future value formula, if you remember that way back in here where we did that, not in here, but in here where we did that future value formula, we're not accounting for nulls, and we have to account for nulls. So we must take and make what? Basically our yearly interest rate. Let's see. Think months here. I'm going to make all of these null. I don't think I have to, but I'm going to anyway. We don't want these, not these. Let's see. I want to remember how I did this. All right. Monthly investment, the yearly interest rate, and all of those nullable after each data type. All right, let me see how I did this. All right. So in here, we want to say int months equal years to years, but we don't want to say years. We want to say years dot value. Okay, don't worry, that error will be gone in just a minute. Okay, but what we have to do is we have to come in. First of all, we want to put in more errors. And what do I mean? We want to put ranges in here. You don't want to be able to put in negative numbers for a monthly investment. That wouldn't make any sense. And we should put a maximum in. So let's come in here, and after this, let's put in a range attribute. And we'll say that the amount you put in must be between $100 and $10,000. Those are arbitrary. I'm just making those up. And I'm going to say again, error message equal investment must be $100 to $10,000, something like that. All right, there shouldn't be any error. Since this is just a string right here, we could put, if we wanted, 110,000, but I don't think that's really necessary. But we could put that in if we wanted to. All right, let's also put in something similar for our interest rate. All right. Now, we don't want to put 100 and 1,000. Of course, that wouldn't make much sense. Let's say the interest rate has to be between 1 and 10%. All right. And we can make it, 1.0 and 10.0. Okay. So we can say here that the yearly interest rate how's that? Must be between 100 and 10,000. And here we'll say the yearly interest rate, I'm going to put a similar message. But must be between 1 and 10. All right. And then finally, for our years, again, we might want to put that to a certain number of years. So I'll do that as well. And that's an int, so it has to be a whole number. Let's say it's going to be between 10 and 50 years. Again, these are different values than I even used. These are just arbitrary. So a number of years must be between 1 and 50, 10 and 50. There we go. All right, now let's keep going here. And what I am going to do, all right, you wouldn't normally do this, but because of what we're doing down here, I am going to take all of these. So I'm going to start here with this, and I am going to make that, because that'll handle the nulls now. Okay. All right. It's getting there. So in our calculate future value, all right, int months equal years dot value times 12, decimal monthly interest rate equals, I'm going to get rid of that M. I don't know if I need that or don't need that, if that's giving me any errors. So let's see what this is giving me an error for. Add cast. Okay. All right. Make sure that it's a decimal. All right. I'm not sure why I'm getting this here. So let's see. It says nullable value type may be nullable. Okay. So years may be nullable, but I've already got that set right here. I don't think I need a question mark there. Nope, because that's going to screw that up. When I did this before, I didn't have any errors here. So why am I getting them now? All right, so future value, monthly investment. Again, this has to now say dot value. Okay, and now all of my errors are gone. I still have a couple warnings. I'll see if we're about working on those in just a minute. All right. And what did we do? We added 2 validation attributes for each one. First one was required, that said that each one of these fields is required. The second one is a range attribute for each one. So the investment must be between $100 and $10,000 a month. Be nice to have $10,000 a month to invest. All right. The yearly interest rate must be between 1 and 10. And the number of years must be between 10 and 50. All right. Now, this is right here. You want the return type to be nullable as well. There's not much more I can do in here to make, to make nullable. Still trying to figure out why I'm getting that. I didn't have that before. All right, let's see though. So let me see if I'm getting my error messages. Lovely. No method for toString. For now, let's just get the toString out of there and let's see if, okay. Now it's saying nullable value may be null, nullable value may be null, nullable value may be null. Okay, those are warnings. All right, let's leave it blank. Now those are our error messages, so that's good. All right. Clear still isn't set, but that's okay. All right. Let's put in something out of range. All right, we're getting our error messages. That's good. All right, let's put in here 1,000. And the yearly interest rate will be 5%. And the number of years will be 10. Those should all be valid values. Still getting 0. It is accepting everything, but our formula is not working. All right. See, the problem is, and I'm going to be totally honest with you here, I wrote this about 2 months ago, and I should have gone back and looked at it before class, and I didn't. No excuse. I'm just being honest with you here. So let's see. We've got all of this done. I think what I'm going to do, no, I'm not going to end it now, but I want to go back. All right. So let me go and actually look in here in our book in chapter 2. We're going to get this working. We're going to have a complete working program. All right. I am going to guarantee that, but I'm going to jump back in here to about page 40. All right. And let's quickly, we're almost done, believe it or not, but what we have to do yet is we have to go in and we have to install Bootstrap, and we'll install a few more things. All right. But before we do that, like I said, I want to get us to this point. All right. So we did this from scratch, and I think it's showing. So you know now, or you all should know, how to start a new app. All right. We will be choosing ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. I wanted one exercise where we did this from a totally empty project. I wanted to do that. To be honest with you, I wanted to do it to see if I could do it. All right. So normally we're going to be choosing that. You've already seen that. All right. Now they go in here and they talk in here as it says the dialogue for configuring a new web app. You typically won't have, this is the kind of stuff we've all been doing. So we went in and we called ours future value. We put it into a folder called future value, and we call the solution name future value. All right. We didn't configure it for HTTPS. You don't really have to, but we could have. They're using .NET 6.0. We're using 7.0. That shouldn't matter a bit. All right. As far as the folders, we came in and we set up our www root. Then we came in and we set up a controllers folder. Then we set up a models folder. Then we set up a views folder. And in that views folder, we added a shared folder. Nothing new there. All right. The way they had you do it was they had you go in and literally delete everything. I didn't, when I went through their example, I found it really confusing. Not that mine wasn't. All right. But they just had you go in and basically remove everything and then add it back in. All right. I guess we could have done it that way as well. All right. So they that's the first time my internet is flared up today. So, all right. So we went in and we added the controller. All right. And as it says in here, and we talked about this earlier, if a method of a controller runs in response to an action, such as a get or post, it's an iAction method. But we have two of them in here. So we had to basically preface it. They're called decorators usually. We had to put an HTTP get decorator when we wanted to just show the view itself. All right, we put in HTTP post decorator when we wanted to submit the view. All right, and it's the difference between a get, which is just providing information, and a post where we're able to go in and actually enter information. All right. All right. So again, they did it. It is the same stuff we did. We added an empty controller. All right. They had this. I didn't know why they did this, but they put some junk in here for whatever reason, but they did. All right. And again, what you'll see as we go on is you'll see the get and you'll see the post. All right. So they added the razor view stuff in here. They added the view. All right. This is not the exact same layout that they put in. They put custom name, etc. Mine is pretty much exactly the same thing. So if you look at theirs right here, and you look at the code that we had in our home index, that code is pretty much the same code that they had. All right. All right. So configuring the middleware. All right. This is that program CS. Like I said, this is the one that I had to go back and change because I didn't have it set up like this. All right. And the reason I didn't have it set up like this is I went online and looked at somebody who had written their own program from scratch, and I tried to pattern my program.cs file after their program.cs file, and I failed. So we came back in and we basically just copied the one from our last program, where we've got the controller defaulted to home, the action defaulted to index, and the ID, which was optional. All right. Running the app and fixing the errors, there were plenty. You already saw that. Now, just so you know, you may or may not have seen this before, but if we look over here, and if you look, that's the debug that we usually use to run the program. But if we move over to here and we click this, you can go down as it says, and you can even go in if you want to and add your own browser. All right. And that's all that's doing, because it'll look a little bit different on different browsers. Had we done that, we would have had customer name, Mary, and future value, but that's not doing any calculations. I mean, to me, all that's doing is it's just spitting out some stuff that we put in there. So I decided not to do that. All right. Now, finding and fixing errors, this shouldn't be new to any of you. They've got an example here where they type in view bags instead of view bag. You know, that's a syntax error, and you know how to find the syntax errors. Nothing new in there. All right. Then we went in, we added a model. Okay, future value model. So I used the same name that they had. And this is what we put in. This is nothing new. This is the exact same thing that I showed you. All right. So we had three properties and you can see them. And I just called mine, I think, calculate. Maybe I did call it calculate future value, but the formula is exactly the same as the formula, all right, that was shown in the book. All right, mine and the one here is the same. I think I used LCV where they used I. No big deal. All right. Then, as it says, we needed to add the Razor View imports page. I showed you the difference between putting it in here where we got an error and then prefacing it with the name of the project, dot the name of the models folder, dot the name of the model, or how we could go in and do it inside of the other file by adding it up here. Same exact stuff. All right. Okay. Then, as it says, we wanted to use the @model directive to bind the model to the view. As it says, this is called a strongly typed view. All right. So what does that mean? Well, when we take a look here, by now, these tags should be almost second nature to you. The ASP-4, the difference between the ASP-4, what it is it's just like when we created a label in our HTML days and we said 4 equals, all right? But now we're saying ASP-4 because we are now taking that label and tying it to that input box that's in there, all right? And we got the action and the controller. We've talked about these already. This is the method that you want to call, and this is the controller you want to. All right, so this is what we ended up making. This was that form that we made. There's really no difference in it between that and what I did. All right. Then to handle the get and post requests, I just didn't do it in the exact order that they did it. All right, I did it in what I considered to be an easier order. So those were those two attributes, again, also known as decorators. The get, which handled the get request, which basically said, show us the form. Then we had a post that specified the post request, which is after we click the calculate button. All right. And notice there's a view here and a view model. As it says, this returns the view that corresponds to the current controller and action. Quite often that's going to be the home controller and index. This passes the model to the view, so it gives it more information. All right, so this is what we did previously. So what I'm going to have to do is to go back, look at all my code, compare it with the code that's in the book here, because there's a line or two that's wrong. There's not much, but there's a line or two that's wrong in here. We did this. We set the future value. I set it to single quote, so there was nothing in there. We could have put a 0 in. That's probably a cleaner way to do it because that is a numeric field. We did this exactly as it's shown here. All right, so there's nothing new in there. The future value app after handling get and post requests. All right, now what they have done in here is they have not removed the web www root folder. That's why theirs looks nice and mine does not, because I wanted to show you how you can manually go in and add that stuff. So this is how it should look. And if this is how ours looked under the get, it did, except it wasn't formatted because we have not yet added Bootstrap. But after we do, that's what it should look like. Now, what I didn't like is for some reason, the formula didn't work. I could put all this in, but rather than getting that, it was coming back with a 0. Again, I will look at that. All right. And make sure that the calculate and the clear work. Now it says how to organize the files for the view. What they have you do is in here is add your own style sheet. Okay. So you can come in and you can add a style sheet, call it whatever you want. They call it, I guess it's site.cs. And they put this in here. I'm not going to go over any of this because by now you should get this. All right, there should be nothing in there that's going to surprise you. If you don't remember, the display inline block will make sure that the label and the input or the text box are on the same line. All right, that's just a little bit of CSS. All right, adding a view start. We did that. We added our layout. Whether you say Razor View empty or Razor layout wouldn't have mattered. You're going to get a blank file anyway. Okay, I put in here, this is the same exact stuff we have. We did the view start where we added that. It says here, in general, it's a good practice to use a view start to set a default layout. However, if necessary, you can use it to override it. We're not. So if we had another layout, we could put that in there, but we don't have that anyway. All right. This dialog, we don't have to do any of that because we weren't providing for an extra one. We've already got our view data in there. We did all of this. We went in to validate the user input. We were able to get most of this to work. So the key takeaways here was we put required by everything. All right. We did then go in and make all of those things that were in here. We put the question mark in there. All right. Now, even though we're doing that, and that question mark means that you will accept nulls, even though we did that, right? Even though we did that, we don't want to accept nulls because when we try to put that information in, we don't want the program to blow up. Well, since we're not putting it into a database, we're not having it blow up. Rather than having it blow up, we're having it show us these error messages. All right. Because again, we're not doing anything special with our input data other than validate it. Okay. All right. So we added all this. Okay. Then once we added it, we checked the data validation. It appears to be working. I put in nothing and I put in out of range stuff and they all gave me the errors as they should. I put in stuff that was valid and it wasn't setting it. So it doesn't like this. Okay. All right. It was keeping it at 0. We put in the validation summary. We got this. It wasn't formatted. It wasn't in red or bold or whatever, because again, we haven't really put any CSS in here. All right. And that's it. So what I am going to do is I am going to stop right here. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go back and I'm going to double check my code against their code. All right. There's going to be a couple places in here where they've named something different than me, or I've missed something. I would never try to do that, but I did. Then tomorrow when you come in, I will give you everything that I've got. You know, my guess is it's not going to take very long. All right. My guess is it'll take approximately a half an hour. We'll see. After we get done with that, then at the end of the chapter in here, notice what they have. Build the future value app using the MVC template, followed by build the future app value app using the empty template. That's what I attempted to have us do. I thought we would have gotten more out of it like that than just keying in stuff that was in the book. All right. So we will go over that, fix it. Let's say it takes no more than an hour. All right. And hopefully it'll take a lot less than that. And we'll jump into chapter 3 then. All right. And chapter 3 is going to be basically a lot of review of Bootstrap. All right. Now, last thing, and that is if I come back here, I'm going to go out to C:\\Muroc \. All right. We've talked about this a little bit before, but there is a case study in here. This goes throughout the book. This goes throughout the book. All right. So what I'm going to ask that you try to do, not today, because we haven't gone over chapter 3 yet, but after we go over chapter 3, I'm going to jump up here to page 4. And I'm going to ask that you try to set this thing up. All right. And you will have some time tomorrow to work on it. All right. So on Thursday, what we'll do for the first one here is I'll go back in. I've already got that working, and I'll show you what it should look like. So you'll know whether or not what you did was correct or was not correct. All right. In addition to that, we will take a look at the student projects. All right. And you'll notice there are 2 of them for chapter 2 and 1 of them for chapter 3. All right. So what I'm going to ask is that tomorrow, when we get done fixing this future value app, all right, and when I get mine fixed, I'll throw it out on a GitHub repo. All right. But when we get done, after we do that and we go through chapter 3, I'm hoping it'll be about 2 o'clock. All right. And then I'm going to ask that you try to do 2-1, 2-2, and 3-1, along with 3-1 from the case study. And then on Thursday, we'll go through all 4 of those together. So you see what's going on. I will make sure I have every one of them built before class. I will run them and make sure that all 4 of those work. That's what we'll do on Thursday. Then finally, Friday, if you don't remember this or you didn't hear it yesterday, I'm having nasal surgery for a deviated septum. I took Friday as a vacation day. Not exactly why I wanted a vacation, but it's fine. So my surgery starts at 9. They told me I should be done by 10:30 and actually should be able to go home by 11. So I will be home in the afternoon. All right. And they said with some people, you can go right, just start doing stuff. Other people, you have bleeding issues and whatever. I don't know what it'll be with me. So I will be on in the afternoon if you have questions. All right. And then we have no class on Monday because it's the holiday. All right. Then on Tuesday, I would give you your first test. If you can do these 3 problems, and we'll have done them in class by then, you should have no problem with the first test. They're patterned all after those 3 problems. All right. So unless you have any questions, Again, I'm going to go in right now and I'm going to fix this, and we'll go back. We'll pick it up there tomorrow. We will add, and just to show you how we're going to do this tomorrow, we will come into our project. All right. And we'll click on our project. We'll choose add, and we're going to choose something we've never used before. All right. And that is client-side library. That's how you can add Bootstrap, jQuery, etc. All the stuff we need. And I wanted to show you how to do that. All right. So like I said, unless either one of you has a question right now, I'm done for today. We'll pick it up here tomorrow. We'll get this working by tomorrow. I have absolutely zero doubt. All right. I'll talk to you then. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
You too.
Thanks. Thanks. See you tomorrow.